y'all hear me? You're okay in the back? So good evening, everybody. My name is Trey Yelverton. I'm our city manager. I've been fortunate to be with the city for a little over 23 years in various capacities, but have been our city manager for about the last 3.5 years or so. And one of the things that I have to do as my duty in that role is to present a budget for the city council's consideration each year. And so we presented that here a week or two ago, and now we're in the process of public engagement regarding that topic. And so what we're here today is hopefully to give some of your feedback on the items that are in the budget or not in the budget that you might want us to consider, and take some of that information that you might want us to have. Before I do that, I want to make sure that we introduce those elected officials that are here in the audience tonight, so you all know who you can touch base with. Of course, Mayor Williams, who's coming in here and joining us. City Council members Jimmy Bennett, Catherine Wildman, Lana Wolf, Council members Sherry Capehart, Michael Glaspie, and Charlie Parker. And then Council member Robert Shepard is in the back for us for you all to provide input to directly or here tonight as you might want to. And so what we've got is a relatively short presentation about the budget, and then I've got a couple other highlights, and then we will take questions from you. So what I want to do, we've got a lot of staff here tonight that you hopefully can answer any detailed questions that you might have, because I don't know the answer to everything, but we can point to the right expert. But I want to point you to a resource that we have on our website that's out there. If you go to the city's webpage, you'll be able to look at our budget and business plan. And you have a bunch of information here for the 16 proposed budget, the presentation that we gave to the council, a budget video, and then some priorities. And then after that, there's really tons of other information that are here from our current 15 years, our current FY15 budget. It has our investor ratings guidance from the investment companies. It's got business plan details. It's got all kinds of other fact sheets. So what I'm going to give you tonight is a very high-level piece of information, but there's tons of detail here if you want to dig into it and read the full detail. We'll be happy to have a narrative or discussion about any piece of the budget you'd like to learn more about. So this is all live. It has been since August the 4th, but you can, just like I'm going to do right here, I'm going to click on our budget video. It's a little 8-minute video, and I'm going to let that play because it gives a good overview, and then I'll go from there.
99 square miles. Arlington covers a lot of space, and it takes a lot to keep it going. So how does everything get paid for?
I have no idea.
Marketing communications manager for the City of Arlington.
I'll find out.
You know, it starts with a budget, much like a family uses to plan. The budget process asks, what can we afford? What needs to be tackled? What will improve the quality of life here in Arlington? Your quality of life. And all of this happens with a careful eye on the bottom line, making sure your taxpayer dollars are well spent. Now, since there are a number of things that make great cities, the City Council has created priorities for the budget process. They include championing great neighborhoods, support quality education, put technology to work, invest in the economy, and enhance mobility. For the next few minutes, we're going to take a quick tour of the 2016 budget, looking at some of the things planned within all of those priorities. And we're going to start with championing great neighborhoods. To keep our city looking nice, $87,000 is planned for new highway and railroad beautification projects, and $215,000 goes to maintain existing beautification programs, including 2 new landscaping positions. Too much rain at one time has been a big concern this spring and summer. The Stormwater Division's budget will go from $9.5 million to $12 million in an increased effort to keep water out of houses and in the creeks. That involves studying Arlington's watersheds and then capital projects to alleviate identified risks. The next priority, support quality education, takes many different forms. The city has strong partnerships with UTA at the center of Arlington, Tarrant County College, and the public schools that lie within the city's borders, including Arlington, Mansfield, Kennedale, and the HEB independent school districts. And for all learners, the Arlington libraries offer countless materials and programs. Let's take a look. If you like to read ebooks, you are not alone. Arlington residents downloaded 50,000 items from the library in the first 6 months of this year. So the library is dedicating $100,000 to acquire additional ebooks. Have you ever seen a 3D printer? Well, libraries that have one say they are constantly busy. That will cost Arlington $4,000. And to keep all collections updated, electronic and otherwise, $214,000 will be invested for books, information, and materials that residents will use for years. As we see at the library, technological advances really change the way we do things in nearly every city department. That's why the council added this priority: put technology to work. Here's what happens. Things like an open data plan, turning the city's information inside out for residents to use and study. The budget also calls for enhanced IT security, a police body camera pilot program, and a city data strategic plan. The fire department will add a new cloud-based system to manage information about responses to fires and all emergencies at an annual cost of $62,000. And registering for parks and recreation programs will be streamlined with a new $205,000 system.
Wow.
Arlington is a great place to visit and live, and also a great place to work. The city does a lot to keep the business community here vibrant and attract new businesses as a part of the priority invest in our economy. So what does all that mean? Well, let's see. One good example of that is the $1.4 billion expansion planned by General Motors. The city created a reinvestment zone to authorize a tax relief for GM. The expansion is expected to generate 500 jobs at General Motors and pump millions into the local tax districts over the next 10 years. To make sure we take advantage of any economic development opportunities, $2.8 million will be set aside, improving the city's ability to attract and retain businesses. Tourism is a major component of Arlington's economy, so the CBD will put a greater emphasis on international events, things like WrestleMania 32, scheduled in 2016, where they're expecting visitors from 40 other countries in all 50 states. This budget also calls for physical improvements in the convention center and an update to the downtown master plan. Another way the city invests in the economy is by making sure we have good water and good roads. Significant funding to support things like the Center Street Bridge over I-20, the extension of South 360, redesign of the 360 I-30 interchange, and improvements along Stadium Drive. And that takes us to the final priority: enhanced regional mobility. Construction and repair of Arlington streets is paid for in several different ways. Some of it comes from the annual budget, as we just discussed, while other dollars come from our bond programs and other special funding. Here's how. More than $16 million in the bond program pays for road improvements, street signal installation and upgrades, electronic message boards, and traffic management cameras, as well as irrigation repair and sidewalk upgrades. An additional $2.5 million over last year's budget will be spent on road maintenance to seal cracks and take care of other repairs, paid for by a quarter-cent sales tax approved by the voters in May of 2014. You may also see some other projects in the 2014 bond program get underway this year, including renovations to 4 city parks: Helen Westler, Village Street Linear, Brantley Hinshaw, and Rush Creek Dog Park. The 2016 budget also calls for the renewal of the Max Bus service for 1 year and an update to the master plan for Arlington's roads. Just like you pay for monthly bills from your budget, the city has to pay for those things as well, ongoing things that we call core services. Some of them are $1.9 million to retain 23 police officers. This will make up for the loss of fees from red light cameras. The cameras reduce call volume, money for new police cars and fire trucks, and $5.6 million for employee raises and benefit increases. That's a look at the 2016 budget. Now, let's take a look at how it impacts your pocket. Revenues for the 2016 budget are anticipated to be over $223 million. The sources for that revenue are property and sales taxes, franchise fees, service charges, and fines and forfeitures. At the same time, $1.55 million in budget reductions were identified, enabling that money to be reallocated to the City Council's priorities. All of that comes to a total of $221.6 million for the 2016 budget. The largest portion, 63%, is devoted to public safety. The remainder is divided among the other city divisions. With 99 square miles, Arlington is a big city with big dreams, a place for residents to live their dreams as well. We'd like your input before the budget is finalized. It's first presented to council in August, and you'll have a chance to talk with your council members at several scheduled town hall meetings. Find more information at arlingtontx.gov.
Okay, well, hopefully you appreciate the abbreviated version of information that's put here. It's only 8 minutes, but it's literally hundreds of pages of detailed information in the budget. I'd be happy to talk about any of those that you're interested in, but I don't want to undersell all the hard work that's been done by the departments and our finance staff to build this information. We're a large city, a large amount of assets, over $3 billion in assets that need to continue to be supported and fed and nurtured and taken care of. And so how we do that every year is part of this process. So tonight's our first town hall meeting. We'll have another one next week. There'll be several other public meetings where we'll consider a tax rate and a budget, and ultimately adopt a budget sometime by September 15th as we complete this kind of methodical process here over the next few weeks. So that's a good, hopefully, overview of what the budget includes. I really want to leave the rest of the time for you all to ask questions or comments about what's on your mind and what you'd like to see or consider us to consider as we build this budget for FY16. So I'll pause there and just start to return it to you all and see what kinds of suggestions, comments, whatever you might have. Go in the far back. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Anna Pettit, and I'm a fourth Arlington family generation. I was really impressed to see the first on tonight's video was neighborhoods, and that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm here to speak for all of the Oak Hill neighborhood, the first neighborhood to apply for a plan with the City of Arlington. We were approved by P&Z and the City Council on March 18th, 2008. We are part of the city's neighborhood comprehensive plan. In 2007, we were approved and received a $2,000 grant from the Neighborhood Matching Grant Program, and in 2008, we were approved and received a grant from the Tomorrow Foundation in the amount of $50,000. Also in 2008, a Conservation District overlay was approved for West 2nd Street. In December of 2010, a Conservation District overlay was approved for South Davis Drive from Sunset Court to 204 South Davis. The Oak Hill neighborhood is currently very active in the National Night Out program. We've installed crime watch signs, street toppers, a landscape park at the end of Parkwood Avenue. Our neighborhood includes many historical homes with very large lots of historical trees. To include the Arlington Historical Society's Fielder Museum, the original home of the Elliots, which is now the quilt shop on Abram, houses that were built in the 1920s, the wonderful house I live in now belonged to my grandparents, built in 1941 and sits on half an acre. We have a building relationship with our neighbors at UTA. As of this year, UTA has helped with the purchasing and installation of LED streetlights to be installed along West 2nd Street from Fielder to Davis. We have a small amount of money left in our account, and just this week, with the help of Alicia Winkleblett, we were able to purchase a Yard of the Month sign for our neighborhood. We take advantage of implementing the strategies that are approved in our neighborhood plan. These strategies include organizing and planning, enhancing quality of life, strengthening the attributes of the neighborhood, establish regular communication among residents, promote stability, having environmental, economic, and social sustainability, enhancing land use. As of today, the city has 8 neighborhoods that council has approved under the comprehensive plan. One of the city's projects is to focus on our neighborhoods. The comprehensive plan includes an emphasis on developing attractive neighborhoods. After viewing the Champion Great Neighborhood goals on the city budget, the city has everything from code compliance to broadcast studio. There is no funding requested for neighborhood outreach program, property maintenance improvement strategy. My strongest suggestion to Mayor, Council, Community Development, and Planning is to ask for at least an additional $500,000 for the neighborhoods that are part of the city's comprehensive plan. Oak Hill neighborhood is looking at spending more than $55,000 to purchase the LED streetlights from UTA. The Better Street Lighting project is part of our comprehensive plan. Our next project will be to extend the streetlights along Elliott Street with approval from residents along West 2nd. Another project includes installing sidewalks. We want to implement the approved goals we set forth in our comprehensive plan. It is our intention to help set a precedent for the other 7 approved neighborhoods. They too can make improvements if the funds are available. I ask all of you please to consider my suggestion to add a $500,000 to the budget for the neighborhood comprehensive plan. This budget will help improve our city's neighborhood.
Thank you, Ms. Pettit, for your leadership and your comments tonight, your leadership in the neighborhood. And I just let you know there's a couple alternatives as neighborhoods such as yours try to pursue the implementation of a neighborhood plan. One of the things that is part of our business plan, not so much funded, but our business plan from using staff will be reinstituting our neighborhood grant program, which still has around $210,000 or so from funding that was provided several years back. The program's been dormant the last couple of years. We're going to be looking to re-energize that, which is very much to the point that you were requesting. And then the other alternative, perhaps, is to give some consideration of making a grant request to our Tomorrow Foundation should the project fit the foundation's goals. So those are a couple alternatives that you might want to pursue. I appreciate your comments and leadership in the neighborhoods. Yes, sir.
Well, thank you, Trey. Dave McAway from Hoover Drive. I got 2 questions. One is something that keeps persisting since they did away with red light cameras, is that the city's going to do away with the DUI unit. I want to get that clarified because it keeps surfacing time and time again. The second question has to do with the purchase of the cameras, body cameras for police officers. As I understand it, that they're going to purchase 50 of these. Is that correct?
Let me take your first question, then I'll take your second. Does that summarize your question good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, let me get to that. The question about the cameras is that 50 cameras, as I understand they're going to get, doesn't seem to me to be an awful lot of cameras. These things have been tested over and over again by the military, been tested by several police departments throughout the nation. I don't see why we can't go ahead and purchase them now. The money's there, especially in the Tomorrow Fund, because I understand there's $9 million in that Tomorrow Fund. There's more than enough money there to purchase all the cameras that we need. They've been tested. We know they work. We know they work well. So that's my question.
Okay, fair enough. So the first question, as it relates to the DUI unit from the red light camera funding, that was part of the unit that is those 23 police officers that is in this proposed budget. So the red light camera program revenue did fund that unit in the past. And as that question was put to the public and as we've dealt with it, when that funding goes away, the funding for those 23 police officers goes away unless we replace the funding. And so that's what this budget does. So that was a risk. This funding, should it be approved, will eliminate that risk. And those 23 police officers that were funded will be continued to be funded into FY16. So we're trying to include the DUI unit, yes, sir. So that should be status quo. We've bridged this summer. We've kept all those officers on the payroll. We've used some one-time money to fix the budgetary gap this year, but next year we need to have a plan, a budget plan, and that's what this document provides. As it relates to the body camera pilot that was proposed in the budget, we've gone out, and this is not really a question of resources or dollars, because your point is well taken about having the ability to make an investment along those lines. This is really about making the right investment. And so there are a number of vendors that are out there that provide this technology to police departments and cities. And so we could go pick one or go pick the other. This is really about a selection process. And so the pilot was intended for us to be able to select multiple vendors to test their product versus this product versus that product. And so my understanding is that we've gone through a process now that we'll be looking at selecting 3 or 4 vendors for deployment of that limited number of cameras as early as mid-September, so about 30 days away. And we'll test each one of those in how it works within our organization. Because it's not just a matter of buying a camera that might be relatively inexpensive. It's all the back office functions that come with it. Do you buy and own your own servers? Do you push it to the cloud and pay kind of a subscription service to who's providing that to you? What kind of back office support do you need from a staffing perspective to deal with open records requests and certain kinds of document provision to people who are going to be asking for it? And then we have to get, I think, our officers, there's a lot of questions from cost, which I just spoke to a little bit, to officer implementation. How does that work? When's it on? When's it off? Is it always on? When are you allowed to turn it off? Per policy, so we have to develop our policies, and the staff will be able to provide feedback during this pilot period of time to help guide some of that. There are go-bys that other cities have learned, which will, I think, inform some good boilerplates to work from. Then you've also got some of the public reaction that we have to deal with as well. You have some who very much would want the body cameras and some that wouldn't. And there's a lot of privacy issues that come with it, in the sense that if we respond to your home on a police call and the body cameras are on and we're in your home, then what kind of record is created for public dissemination off of that in the future? What are those lines? So those are part of what we'll be exploring in the next 6 months. I would expect that we'll be completed with this pilot window by the early end of the first quarter of calendar 16. And then we'll be in a position to select a vendor and proceed on with the chosen application. We want to make the right choice and not just a choice. And so that looks at total cost of upfront and ongoing, and it also helps then go through all the processes within an organization and a community as we look at deploying this technology to Arlington. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Donna Anderson. I chair the Arlington Mayor's Committee on People with Disabilities, and there are a number of us here that are wearing red to show our solidarity. And we are here to say that this city is not as successful as we would like to see it for people with disabilities. 20% of the population currently has a disability in one form or another. And in 15 short years, by 2030, 30% of us will have a disability. We are the largest and most underrepresented minority group in the country. And you can join our group at any time, and you don't have to wait around for an invitation. And guess what? You're all going to join our group, or you're going to die first. For most people, disability, I think that most of you guys in this audience, and a lot of us have thought that disability is something that happens to other people, kind of like divorce or cancer or addiction. That's something that happens in somebody else's family. But I'm here to tell you guys that we are your mothers, fathers, or your siblings, your co-workers, your church members. We are your children. And it's time that we all be allowed to fully participate in our communities, because we have a lot to add to our community. We are here seeking a full-time, standalone ADA coordinator position, which would ensure compliance with all kinds of programs and facilities the city has to offer to people with disabilities. And considering that in another 15 years, 3 in 10 of us are going to have a disability, we can no longer be reactive. We were reactive as a city to the tune of about $500,000 in legal costs with the Frame versus City of Arlington case, and that was an ADA accessibility case. And this is a matter of risk management. It's a matter of being cost effective. It's a matter of planning for the future. It's important for everybody to plan for the future. And we did some research recently, and there are a number of cities here in Texas that are smaller than Arlington who have full-time standalone ADA coordinator positions. There were a couple of surveys that were done recently, one by Easter Seals and one by the AARP, could not think of the acronym, sorry about that. And they were done on quality of life for people with either the aging population or people with developmental disabilities and intellectual disabilities. And Texas sadly ranked, I think, 49th and 50th in those surveys for the quality of life to its citizens with disabilities. So there are a number of cities in Texas that offer more than we do, and even cities that are smaller. But, you know, if we're kind of at the bottom of the barrel, let's look at other cities across the country: St. Louis, Scottsdale, Birmingham, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. Those cities all have full-time ADA coordinators, and some of them have more than one. All of the ADA coordinators that we spoke with from the 10 cities that we surveyed, and 9 of them responded back, plus the 4 cities outside of Texas, they all said we have more than enough to keep us busy 40 hours a week. And I'm just here to say that I think it's a little short-sighted. We would love to see you guys include us, because you will eventually be us. And it's a very prudent thing again to plan for the future. So we really appreciate your considering having a position where somebody is addressing this full time, as opposed to how it has been for the last 25 years, where people have had to perform their full-time capacity, which is typically if they're a director of a department. That gives them a full plate anyway. And then the ADA coordinator duties are kind of added aside. Those poor people need to be flown. There's no way, again, that we can be anything but reactive in our current state. Let's be proactive, let's be welcoming to our own futures. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Thank you for your service to our community. You're committed. Other questions?
I got two.
Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm from Maryland, on the east side, and according to 2014 budget, on start repair on College Street, 2016, and New York in 2017. What about Mitchell Street, the worst street in the east side?
Okay.
When is it going to be fixed?
Okay. Let me answer part of it, and I'll ask Keith to come up. The street question, because I'm sure we can all relate to this in one way or the other about the streets that are in our neighborhoods. It's a data-driven decision based on street condition indexes, okay? So Mitchell, I would agree, is a bad street. I've got several bad streets, unfortunately. So then it becomes a matter of matching up which streets get priority, which is a combination of how are the water lines underneath that, because we don't want to do it multiple times, we want to do it right once. So we're going to align the condition of the water sewer lines with the condition of the street. We're going to pick those streets, and we got to align the money, and then we've got to make sure that we're spreading the work out through town. Now, that said,
But Mitchell is worse than College ever here.
so, Keith, do you know, is there any plan for Mitchell Street right now in the near term on any of your capital improvement plans? Our Public Works Director, Keith Melton.
We're looking at 2016. Mitchell is one of the projects we're considering, but we haven't finalized that program, so I can't really give a specific
Okay.
answer.
So it's getting consideration for 16, but the program is not final. So I would tell you to talk to Mr. Melton to make your plan. But you all will see, we spend between street maintenance sales tax and capital bond dollars, we'll spend $30 to $40 million a year on streets in town. Some of it is maintenance, anywhere from potholes to crack seal. And then when conditions are in the road condition you're describing where the road has failed, then it becomes a full rebuild. Water lines, sewer lines, curbs, and gutters. And we have to spread that around, and we have a good piece of data on the conditions of our streets citywide that are updated every 3 years. So we're able to model those and take a look at them. But I know you've got a street that's on your radar screen, and I know we could all point to one on ours. So I'll make sure Mr. Melton knows your.
It's been on the radar screen for the last 10 years.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I understand. Okay. Yes, sir.
I got two things. My name's Jacob Porter. I'm from 1901 Market Street in Arlington. First, I guess it's a really quick one. It was, what is the increase in volume call for the Arlington Police Department? I guess the dispatchers, it was talking about $563,000 is going to an increase in call volume. The second thing I have, it's, I guess I have a problem with the 6-minute and 30-second video referring to the loss of fees for the red light cameras. During the elections, we heard the argument from the previous mayor and a few city council members that it was never about the money and it was always about the safety. It's pretty hypocritical now that they need to make up for the loss of the fees. If red light cameras' sole intended purpose was to eliminate the number of people running a red light, then wouldn't that have decreased the fees coming in? Therefore, since they stated there was a revenue loss, now it just seems kind of hypocritical. And like I said, it seems like it is for the money and not the safety. Basically, they're saying they still want people to, they want the cameras back so that people can run red lights so that they can get the money back. 17,000 Arlington citizens voted to have them removed, and it just seems, like I said, hypocritical to say that they need to make up for loss of revenue now. Thank you.
Okay, yes, sir. Thank you for your questions. Let me start with that last one, and then Chief Krause and I'll probably get you to come up and help on the dispatching question. But, you know, red light cameras, as evidenced by the voters, result in mayor gone. Okay, and the reality of that is there was a revenue associated with that program that covered costs that were appropriated in previous budgets, which tie back to the 23 officers that were alluded to. So we have a choice. Red light cameras no longer provide that revenue, so then we lower the programmatic expenses that were in alignment with that. That's not the choice that we've made. What we've said is, in this proposed budget, is that those police officers, DUI unit and patrol unit, are still important to what we need to provide, not at red light intersections, but just throughout the community. So this budget plans for an orderly transition to maintain the status quo of policing capability. Red light cameras are gone, as evidenced by the election and the vote. On the 911 dispatch, and I'll let the chief speak to call volume, but I also know that part of what we're dealing with there is the exceedingly high turnover in that area. There's a lot of mandatory overtime based on a need to fill those positions or seats at the phone so that when you call 911, someone's there to answer. And based on the amount of bodies we have there and the hours and turnover for training, et cetera, we have a high volume of turnover there because of the mandatory overtime. So some of these resources are to spread the work out among more people so that we have hopefully a better choice or better opportunity to not have that kind of turnover, keep our folks longer. But as it relates to call volume, I'll let Chief Krause speak to that.
We did verify that with an independent consultant who basically said we run staff dispatch. That was concurrent. But
Here you go.
we do about 430,000 calls a year. Very busy system. And the consultant said, we're honestly understaffed, technology needs that they're requiring additional people. And as the manager alluded to, we need more people in the seats to take those phone calls. So we did this with a third party assessing, making sure that our numbers were valid. That was done, and therefore the recommendation followed that stuff.
Yes, sir.
Dave Burton, 7300 Granville Court. And it's like this gentleman was speaking a while ago about the red light, talking about the money. Why don't we look at increasing the fines for the people that are breaking the law, not putting the taxes on all the other citizens that are not running the red light or speeding? That's something I think that the city needs to look at. And then put it in the budget to increase the amount of money to stop a lot of it. Now, I didn't like the red lights, but if I run a red light and I get a ticket, I pay more, that's so big. But that's one way to do it without having other people pay for somebody else's, wrongdoing.
Okay, good question, I understand, and the way that works is if you get a citation in town today, there is something that they call the window fine. So based on your speed or based on your violation, whether it's $150, $200, or $250, there's a fee that is set by the municipal court judge that is determined reasonable relative to that violation. Could you raise fines? You could, but what it grows to then is a difficulty for the community and the burden that the community has to pay those fines. So if the fine is $150 or $200, did the point get made? Did I learn from it? Am I going to change my behavior in the future? Maybe. If it's $500, would it mean more, or would that create other consequences of community frustration as it relates to dealing with police officers or with the municipal court system or with government in general? And so the fee schedule is reviewed annually and determined to see what seems reasonable. But just putting more on the fine is not necessarily part of what we would consider to be a good budgetary strategy because of some of the other unintended consequences that might bring about. But good point. I appreciate that question. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Cynthia Abercrombie. I live at 1715 Wilson Drive. I have a question regarding the state of the arts in senior center that council people and parents seem to be in agreement with. I didn't hear it mentioned.
Yes, ma'am. So the question is about the new senior center. And so where we're at on that is we've received direction from the council to have our park department put that into the master plan and for us to begin looking specifically at sites and conceptual design. What is it going to look like? Where would it go and what is it going to look like?
How's it going to get paid for?
We have not made a decision on how to fund it. I do believe there is
There you
good
go.
consensus of the council to provide a senior facility. But the funding piece is still to be determined. And the funding piece may tie directly to where you're going and what it's going to look like. So likelihood of how to fund that in the future, which is not, as you pointed out, in this budget, is it will likely take voter approval of one of two things. Either a sales tax election, which would provide a tax dedicated to that project, and or other things. Some of the things that we've been talking about are an economic development sales tax, in which park facilities are one of the legally allowable expenses. So you can create an economic development corporation, which we've done recently, and fund it with a sales tax, or you can fund it out of other items. And so the decision on funding has not been determined. The other option, besides the sales tax, would be to just go have a bond election like we had last year on streets and park facilities and ask the public, do you want to issue bonds to build this facility?
More debt.
Either
Thank you.
one of
No,
those
thank you.
choices, I think, will be informed by the work that we'll hopefully be doing between now and the end of the year as it relates to where and what this is going to look like, which the council has asked us to work on. So we're working to make that happen now, but that's probably a now to the end of the year effort. I've also been asked to give them specific deadlines for election dates for a next May election. There was some discussion about a November election. That ultimately was not selected in favor of doing this additional work, this additional preparatory work, so that there would be maybe a more informed decision at a May election time. And so that's more to be determined. The council hasn't made a final decision on that. That's kind of where that project is. Yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon. My name is Maria. And I wanted to ask you, I saw that you were talking about making our roads better, a little bit having to do with transportation. I know as a growing city, our community, especially our minority and our elderly community, are having issues having access to accessible and affordable health care. With the closest resources being either clinics that are run on a charitable basis, which are overwhelmed, or having to travel to Fort Worth. So I was trying to figure out, has anybody thought about or planned on how to bring public transportation to our city? And or you also talked about bringing businesses to our area, a clinic that would offer affordable healthcare affordable options for those that are underinsured or uninsured.
Okay. They try to take a stab at that. There's multiple pieces to that. From a healthcare community, we have a burgeoning health investment. If you look around Arlington Memorial Hospital or down south around USMD and MCA, there's a lot of investment being made by healthcare companies, doctors' offices, medical office buildings, et cetera. So there are more resources being put into place. How people have access to that is largely going to be dependent upon the type of program that they're, just the type of insurance that they have
Some
procured.
of us have none.
Some have none, and so those take you then more into the county hospital perspective, JPS, which has the home health care clinic down on Arkansas Lane or downtown. But transportation to any of those accesses is limited. The only real services the city directly operates is the handy trans service, which can get our disabled and elderly pretty much anywhere on a demand response perspective. We have then the regional connectivity of the MAX service from downtown up to the Trinity Railway Express, which gets you east and west to downtown Dallas or Fort Worth and whatever medical facilities you might want to try to tap there. Not the most direct route, but nonetheless access there. And so what we'll be doing this upcoming year, to answer your question about the more comprehensive solution.
Yeah, like, let's say like the Northside Clinic, having that sort of clinic in Arlington, because there are so many people that need access to that type of service on a income fee-based
Yeah.
service.
So from a health clinic perspective, I think we would be looking at where's our role and where's other roles. So for example, the entity that's charged with healthcare in Tarrant County is Cal Pittsburgh Hospital. So we would be working in collaboration or in partnership with them to figure out what the best ability to serve our community is. They determined heretofore that the home health care clinic on Arkansas is the best solution. That's probably debatable about whether or not that is. Would we like more than one? Would we like one far north? Would we like one far south? Those are questions that we need to work with our county partners on, and perhaps there's a role for the city to participate in some capital there. I don't know. It's a thing that's to be determined, but our core business isn't healthcare; it's theirs, and so we would go to look to that entity to provide us that expertise here. Transportation, on the other matter, is something that is usually generally local government affiliated or transit authority affiliated, and that's where we have probably a little more direct role. But both of those are really complex. I do expect on transportation there'll be more work in the next year or two specifically about planning as it relates to transportation. But right now that's going to be limited to HandyTran, the city's MAX connection to regional rail, and then nonprofits who provide service such as Catholic Charities and Mission Arlington, who also do demand response for certain populations. Somebody hasn't asked a question before I start doing repeats. Yes, Ms. Beth.
Kim Field, 409 Elm Street. Comment first, a few weeks ago, the city was gracious enough to have the convention center be a forum for gas drilling questions. And I noticed I received 2 notices about this budget meeting. And I thought it would have been nice maybe if one notice could have gone to that convention center so that it would have been more well attended. Then my question is about the $2,400 per fee per gas well. That was put on our ordinance. I understand we're in litigation, but have we been collecting that $2,400 per gas well per fee?
No.
No? Okay. And then my next question is, for at least the last 5 years, I've been asking for an infrared camera. The current equipment that we have, our PIDs, 4-gas ray, area ray, TVAs, they've got limitations such as they don't track benzene until it's over 100 parts per billion. Hydrogen cyanide may not be picked up. For sure, we don't capture formaldehyde. We don't screen for fracking chemicals like hydrochloric acid. So we also need equipment that speciates effluents on the spot, not sent to a lab for 7 weeks later to know what our emergency responders in the neighborhood was breathing if we had an issue then. And we also need to ramp up our water testing. I found out from our water director that we only test twice a year for VOCs and heavy metals. So we are sitting, our Lake Arlington water reservoir is sitting over 50 to 100 gas well drilling casings. And, that's 7,000 feet down, but the science isn't settled about where these fractures go and how they communicate. And the ignition event we had at Lake Arlington Baptist Church, it was very traumatic under the earth, and that was less than a mile away from the aquifer. We don't know if that event has done something permanently to our drinking water source. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Michelle. Yes, ma'am. In the back.
Good evening. Deborah Spell, Arlington NAACP. The Arlington NAACP sees body cameras as beneficial for both the Arlington Police Department as well as for all citizens. My question is, once the initial pilot program concludes, what is the next procedure and timeline? Will there be a citizen vote, or is this a definite program? Are all the police going to be issued the body cams? And then lastly, what is the timeline? How will it be phased in?
So let me try to take a stab at that, and then if, where's the chief? Oh, there he is, just in case. And so the timeline of this program, as I alluded to earlier, I think the pilot should be completed by spring of next year, probably the tail end of the first quarter of 16, so March, April-ish.
Yes, I understood that part.
At
And
that-
then after
yes.
it's concluded.
Yes. At that point, I think we would be in relatively short order, making a recommendation to the city council for which vendor we believe meets the best value for what we need to do from a cost and from an operational benefit to our officers, as well as parallel to that, putting policies together that officers will need to utilize. So I would expect that in relatively short order, we'll be recommending the council to give consideration to a program of X based on what the pilot results are.
You also indicated that you didn't know whether, because of privacy issues, whether or not you were going to do this, and you had to work out those particular issues. Was there some question whether or not this program was going to actually be initiated?
Yeah, good question. So I believe that we have initiated the pilot, and it is what that is, it's a pilot. The final decision will need to be determined almost all those factors.
I'm not speaking of the pilot, I mean, going forward.
Yes.
After the pilot is completed.
It's a question that the city council will have to answer at the conclusion of the pilot.
So it's not indefinite whether or not we're going to get the body cameras or not.
That body will have to consider that at that time. I can't speak for them, but we are doing the work and providing a professional recommendation that this is worthy of our evaluation.
That's my question, whether or not the definite program is going to be completed. We're going to actually get, so the answer is no, it's not.
We will be recommending a choice for them to consider, but ultimately it is the council's decision to allocate and authorize that program.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
My name is Anthony Nagy. I've lived here since 1978. This is the first time I've attended one of these meetings, but I've been in many budget meetings. The question I have for you is these numbers, they're pretty big, $440 million. Do you ever measure the efficiency of your expenditures? Do you ever look and say, how many man hours do we get per dollar of fixing up the park? Whatever the answer, whatever the work is. I mean, typically people sometimes look at last year's budget and say, well, it's increased at 4%. That sounds like a good number, but that's what inflation is. So how do you arrive at these numbers? How do you decide that these are good numbers? The thing that stuck out when I looked at this is a very small item. That's a 3D printer, $4,000. That's about the same number that came out of a budget that I saw at UTA. I know guys that can build them for like 400 or 500. I don't understand why. I mean, these numbers just seem very, I don't know where they come from. So that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
Where do they come from?
Sure, let me explain to you a little bit about the process that we go through. So where we're at today was a process that actually began probably about 5 months ago with a multi-year financial plan. It is driven by the departmental business units that talk about some of their operational needs. So as the chief alluded to on 911, for example, we know call times, dispatch times, turnout times, all the types of things that get an ambulance or a fire truck to your house. We know all the metrics relative to that. So how do we want to, when we make an investment, we want to make sure that we are preserving those metrics or improving those metrics. So if you go to virtually any department, and you can look in the business plan by department, they will have key performance indicators in there that will tell you crime rate data, library card information, you name it, there's a bunch of different indicators that are in there. So if you have a particular interest, we could drill down a little deeper on any one of those areas, but yes, sir, all of those have some tie back. Now then, I have to determine, what does it take to provide that service? So if I'm gonna have a 911 dispatch center, and I need to run it 24/7, 365, and I have a call volume of X number of calls coming in, how many seats do I need to have? How many people to fill the seats for whatever hours? We start backing into all that. And then we look at competitive wages. What are we gonna do to make sure that we're getting those folks who want to sit there? We're providing a fair wage and benefit to keep them there. And so a lot of the incremental changes to the budget are really compensation driven, because we've made a programmatic decision that that's a line of business or a service that this community expects and or desires. We could make alternative choices that we don't need that line of business, and we could reduce or eliminate that. But I'm working from an assessment that the types of things that we're offering is what this community expects, and then we make reductions to things that are no longer relevant, or particular things that we've innovated to a different platform or a different way to do it, and then we come back and we make some additions. So this budget, for example, I think deleted 19 positions, it added back 18 for a net of -1 at the end of the day, but it's about aligning the priorities to what we're trying to hit. And then each one of those businesses, like I say, have metrics. That's really, local government is a business. I mean, we are operating the people's business, and it has costs to it. You have to provide revenue from economic efforts of property tax and sales tax. And if we don't provide the revenue to run the business will shrink, or lines of business, just like any other family. We would make selections that are different. And so that's part of this is, what do we want to do, what do we not want to do? But can we demonstrate metrics on how we get to these various things? Yes, sir, we could. I'm sure the librarian would love to talk to you about 3D printers. Will we be able to find it cheaper? Perhaps, but the best information would indicate that that's what the type of model is. If when we go to buy it and procure it, we'll get multiple bids, we'll buy the best value, the lowest price. So that's a constant system. Thank you for your comment. Yes, sir, in the back.
I'm asking on behalf of my dog Louie. We saw on the slide that there's going to be a West Street dog park. Is there some target dates for that?
Do I have a park person? So Lemuel Randolph is our Director of Parks and Recreation, and so he can answer the question on behalf of Louie, did you say? Yes. Okay, so what's Louie's expectation?
Sure, appreciate the question. It's a long-awaited amenity for you, I know. The master plan for the dog park was recently completed. We are currently under design, and we expect construction to commence in the springtime. And that should last about 6 months.
Okay. Yes, ma'am. Ms. Cannon.
Hi. Can you hold up?
Hi, I'm Kelly Cannon, 901 Kristen Court. If a group of citizens live around a big, what they call a nature preserve, what the city calls a nature preserve, and they notice it falling into neglect considerably, and they've tried everything they can to approach the city, yet whatever department will listen to them at this point. What else can be their next step, and can a part of the budget of the $60 million bond package from last November be carved out just a little bit to where we can help this group of neighbors with the Randall Mill Nature Preserve?
Okay. Fair question. Maybe we need to back up here. Part of the answer about the bond election is no. That's not a good connection, because I think what we're talking about here is a maintenance issue. So you don't want to use capital dollars for a maintenance issue. That needs to be an operating cost. So it needs to be part of the annual operating budget to the degree that we allocate resources for any particular initiative. So I think the point on this particular topic, and I've visited with Mr. Kelly over the years, as well as I know Lemuel has, and our former park director has, as well as several council members, this is really a question about what is the appropriate level of service for this area. And if it's a nature area, do you let it be nature, or do you manicure it to some degree? And that's probably the discussion that we've had philosophically, is what is the level of service? And we've had some, I think, historic disagreements about, but I might let Lemuel add to that.
Sure, and my understanding of your question was, can neighborhood or citizens come together with the city to develop a plan for maintenance?
Absolutely. Yes, sir.
Summarize your question? The short answer is yes, and not only can they, but we have a number of partnerships with neighborhood groups across the city relative to nature areas. You may be aware of a study that we had commissioned several years ago, specifically for the Randallville nature area, that provided us a maintenance plan for that area. That is the document that we use to affect the maintenance of the Randallville nature area. We certainly could provide that to you and other neighbors that are interested in it, but that plan is what we use as a guideline to affect the maintenance of that area.
Follow-up comment?
Sure.
We're concerned about the neglect at the certain level that it's at, that it might actually become a fire hazard. It's like kindling waiting for a spark. And that's a very dangerous situation and status of this particular preserve.
And that certainly would be a concern of ours as well. We are out there very often. We certainly could schedule a time to visit with you specifically to address individual concerns that you may have. But rest assured that the maintenance plan that we have in effect is reflective of the study by the professionals that we hired several years ago. But if there's a specific instance that you're concerned about, certainly be happy to visit with you and determine the course of action.
Thank you, sir.
And I would just echo as a follow-up to that and other comparable issues. The budget that's presented here does a lot of things, but it doesn't do everything. And there are some things that you have to go through the process of what is the city's role, what is the community's role, and what are the things that volunteers do pick up on and do on their own with some agreement with folks being on city property, and then determining what that is. So that, plus many other options exist out there for citizen involvement to contribute meaningfully to our broad community. The city, as one former employee told me one time, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. So what is this budget? What are the things that we're doing? And what are the things that the community wants to do? And that's the kind of thing we just do.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, I'm Tammy Kelly, I'm also part of the Designated People with Disabilities. Donna gave very good points, but my question is, what will it take for the city of Arlington, the size that we are, and she talked about some of the towns, less population that has an ADA coordinator, what would it take for the city of Arlington to consider having a full-time ADA and aging coordinator? Thank you.
Okay, sure. That's a budgetary question, which it's appropriate that it's brought up at this time. 2 years ago, 3 years ago, I can't remember which, we actually recommended an ADA coordinator in the budget. And we thought at that time we had a grant funding source to cover it. Unfortunately, the grant funding turned out not to be available to us. So then that means it rolls back to the city's general fund for the tax-supported expenditures. So then it becomes part of the quilt that's being woven together here between 23 police officers, street maintenance, dispatching, ADA coordinator, where does all of that fit? And to the point that was made earlier, we do have an ADA coordinator, just not a full-time dedicated ADA coordinator. Keith Melton serves as our ADA coordinator, and I would argue that across the city, we ask our staff to wear multiple hats. We, in many ways, don't have the flexibility to have specialists in every line of business, but we all do multiple things, and that's one of the things that Keith has done over the years is do that. Would we be more effective if we had a dedicated person? I would have a dedicated person to work 100% of the time on those things. It would not improve my legal compliance issues or things such as that, because we're going to be in compliance as we build things. Would we do more faster, more proactive as opposed to reactive, as Ms. Anderson pointed out? I think there's an argument to be made for that, and this is a perfect time to bring it up. It's a budgetary consideration. It's a position authorization and associated salary and support for that position. Yes, ma'am. Yes.
Charlotte McGowan,
Okay.
whatever happened to the proposal for New York Portal?
Okay. I might ask Mr. Fairjohn to join me to explain this. The proposal for the New York corridor is the question, whatever happened to it? It was adopted by the City Council as a corridor strategy. And there are several things that are actually underway and that have been funded and under design. So I'll let Jim talk about those, because he's much more detailed about what is actually about to be ready for dirt turning on that project.
Yeah, that strategy was adopted by the City Council a little more than a year ago. Since that time, one of the signature elements has been to rebuild the New York corridor, New York Avenue. It'll be in two phases. The first phase will be on the northern section, and then the second section in the south. And that does include all of the amenity packages that we talked about during that adoption process. That project, Keith, starts, we're going to construction first part of next year, so first quarter of 2016. And then the second phase will follow right after that, and it's fully funded.
Is that you're gonna tear down the whole
Separate issue. Yes, separate issue. I'll answer that question. So does that mean they're going to tear down La Jolla Apartments? And so I want to make sure everybody is clear on the state of La Jolla Apartments, because I've had some recent conversations about that. We are under court order to not demolish La Jolla Apartments.
Wow.
So we are not allowed to touch that. There will be a hearing next month, I think on September 18th or something like that, where a judge will hear competing arguments, where the current property owner believes that they can rehabilitate that property and bring it up to city standards, and where we argue that we don't think that that's capable. A year or so ago, the city council allocated money to actually do the asbestos abatement and demolition of that property, should we have to do that. We thought it was such a significant thing that we actually allocated money to be prepared to do that. We hope that that's not necessary, that we can get the owner to do it, or that we can get a new owner to do it who wants to redevelop that property. But if all else fails, and the judge does rule in our favor eventually, we're prepared to go in and knock that property down. Again, what's been at least my whole career a problem.
So what do you do about the transients that stay in
I got a complaint about that. What do you do about the transients that hang around? We need to be on top of that with our police department, going around and making sure that it's closed up and that people who are hanging out on the property are moved along. So we pass that along to the police department. Yes, well, we need to stay on top of that. Yes, sir, Mr. Mackel.
Trey, a question has to be made with the police department. Are we getting a sufficient number of qualified applicants to fill the vacancies within the police department? The second question is, as I understand it, the fire department is going to purchase 2 new pumpers and 1 additional ladder truck. Now, are these replacements for existing fleet, or are they a new buy? And if they're, what happens to the ones that are being retired? Will they go into the reserve fleet, or will they be sold off? And finally, my last question has to do with the upcoming hospital district bond election, $805 million, I think it is. what is the long-term impact of that bond election on the city of Arlington? Because that means that that's gonna dip into people's disposable income in the future. So what's the impact of that on Arlington? It's a lot to answer.
Okay.
It got
Let me answer
postponed.
the fire truck first, the police second, which I'll need chief to come down, and then the hospital last. Fire trucks, there are three pieces of equipment.
Didn't
If
it
you're
get
right, 2 engines,
postponed?
1 ladder. They are new pieces of equipment to replace aging pieces of equipment. But the way we work that is we cascade the equipment down. So the newer is gonna replace some of our reserve type of apparatus, and then some of the things that are no longer frontline will then move into the reserve. And then those reserves are then sold at auction. So it's a cascading effect of the newest kind of bumping it all the way down, and then the oldest or poorest condition, not necessarily the oldest, because sometimes the oldest are doing a little better than some of the ones that might be a few years younger.
So these are replacements.
These are replacements, yes, sir. So then on the recruitment for police officers, I'll ask Chief Johnson to talk about that, and I'll come back to the hospital question.
Good evening, Will Johnson, Police Chief. So our recruitment efforts are like many other departments in North Texas and around the country. We are seeing a fewer number of applicants express an interest to join policing. To date, we're about 17% down in the total number of applications that we've received in this calendar year. But we're still able to receive qualified applicants to be able to hire them as employees. So in the most recent academy class, we were shooting for 24. We ultimately started the academy with 22. And so we're relatively satisfied that both we're able to match the volume and the qualifications of the individuals that want to be police officers.
Chief, do you think the downturn on the policemen that were recruited would be because Arlington requires a 4-year degree rather than a 2-year degree like Dallas and Fort Worth?
No, I don't believe that at all. Because if that were the case, then we would have a disproportionate number of decrease with other agencies in North Texas, and we do not. So I actually believe that our 4-year requirement helps us with our recruiting, because what we have seen historically is individuals who have a 4-year degree, they have options. They could join any kind of profession that they want to, but yet they have a servant's heart, and they want to serve as a public safety servant here in Arlington. And I think it's helped us with our recruiting. I think there are other factors that are driving some of the decrease within policing as a profession on a national basis.
Well, I had heard, out here in this very chambers, last meeting, that they had been losing police officers to Dallas and Fort Worth because of the cost of the going on to get the 4-year degree versus the income. Because they said that it costs anywhere from $35,000 for a police officer to go on and get that 4-year degree, and they would leave from here to go to Fort Worth or Dallas. And I heard that here in this chamber this last week.
I believe that I was in attendance during that same conversation. I heard a very different statement. What I heard being presented was the fact that they were referencing earning potential and the competitiveness of wages in the Metroplex. And they were arguing the fact from that position that the competitive wages should be higher because of the college degree, but not as an impetus for others going someplace else.
So I do think that we'll be continually challenged with that question from the national profile of policing and people's desire to want to be in that profession. But then from a competitive salary perspective, are we paying a wage that's going to continue to attract folks here? We have a lot of market comparable data to demonstrate or not demonstrate that we look at every year. And that is one of the priorities that the council has asked us to pay more attention to and to give consideration to making additional investments as part of this budget cycle. So we'll be giving some additional consideration to that. Mr. Malcolm, as it relates to the hospital election, should there be one? I'm sorry, I haven't decided. I haven't heard. Have they made that decision? I'm not.
They postponed it.
Next year. Okay. So the way that I understand that situation to be, they proposed it as a zero cost increase, meaning that any debt that they take on, they'll lower operational costs. So it's a wash to the actual taxpayer. I know there's maybe questions about whether or not that's actually how it'll be implemented, but that's what the hospital representatives have held out. So from a tax payment perspective, it should be equal. What we do have to look at, though, that is a concern that we have to look at, but it's not just the hospital district, it's all taxing jurisdictions. Because when we go to the markets and we issue debt, and we're fortunate that 2 of the 3 rating agencies have said that the City of Arlington, you can be proud, is a AAA rated investment credit. That's the best. It's the best there can be because we've got adequate reserves, we've got strong financial principles, and we execute our plan. That said, part of what they take a look at is what's called overlapping debt. So they'll look at the city's credit profiles, but then they'll take a look at the school districts and the hospital districts and all other districts, because we all know that while only 25% of what you pay in taxes comes to the city, the majority of that goes to the school district, and then other fragmented pieces go to those other taxing jurisdictions. So from an investment bond rating perspective, they're curious about all of those pieces and how they tie together. So it's something that might have some weight on our future credit. I don't think it's a differentiating point, but a bond rating analyst will take note of that as they underwrite the credit.
Hey, that's right.
Oh, yes, sir. Mr. Kelly?
My name is Pat Kelly. I back up to the Rhineville Park Nature Preserve. There's a couple of things I think we ought to address, and you guys can figure out how y'all want to appropriate the money if you would. We now know how to germinate post oak trees where they're transplantable, and they're a heck of a lot better tree than a cedar elm. If you plant a cedar elm adjacent to sidewalks and curbs, in not too many years, the sidewalks and curbs are collapsed and they have to be taken out and redone. They suck up all the water so fast that it just creates a mess really quickly. The post oak tree, out of every tree that you can think of in the repertory that's will grow around here, is least likely to do these types of things. In the article that I wrote that's in thepostoaks.org, the article is entitled "A Solution to the Riddle, Post Oak Decline." At the very bottom of that article, it explains in detail about how you go about germinating these post oaks. There was a college professor in Oklahoma that uncovered all these things, and they grow very successfully, and as a result they'll grow faster, and they have over a 90% transplant success rate. In years gone by, when you bought public land and you were going to make a park for it, or a school or a highway, and there was adjacent land next to the highway, the first thing you did was take out all the junk trees. Now we plant them. We've lost our sanity. Just because they'll grow, that doesn't mean that we should plant them. I mean, you can plant a hackberry, it'll grow, but nobody wants a hackberry tree in their yard, really, do they? I mean, they'd rather have something nicer. Post oaks don't have to, once they've grown up and you trim their lower limbs to where you can walk under them, they basically prune themselves. By nature, there's air through them. They survive strong windstorms. They survive ice storms. The cost of having a post oak is very, very minimal compared to other trees that we plant. We know this by some of the trees that we have around town, and they hardly ever have to be taken care of. The next thing is the City of Austin has the Parks and Recreation Department has a good website that also includes a section about how you take care of nature areas that don't have any don't have the advantage of irrigated water. What we have to do in these areas, if they're going to stay natural, is we have to get rid of the junk. We can use volunteers, and we've used volunteers in the past, and for that I really appreciate it. But I think we either need a forestry mower or a forestry mower attachment if we're really going to get rid of all the junk in this city. Because there's an overgrowth, like, I think we probably come in first in that in the Metroplex. And that's not anything to be proud of. But if we took some of the information off of my website, if you don't mind me boasting about it a little bit, and more. I mean, actually, there's a website that talks about vegetation management for Grapevine and Louisville Lake. And under the references, the City of Arlington Parks Department's in it. They participated in creating that website years ago. And there were many things that I got from there for the writings that I put in my site. So that's another thing. We need a volunteer mowing program. We had one in the past, we can have one now, or wherever you guys can work out the details. Everybody that's come out to the park, and you know this, not just in the Roundabout Park nature area, but all over town, anybody that comes out and works signs an insurance waiver. I've signed a half a dozen of them over the years. I've been doing this for 50 years. I've gotten pretty good at it. And I know what needs to be done in an area. They need to be mowed very carefully, and all that's described in this website. But if we had a section in the Parks and Recreation website that explained to people what are the trees of virtue and what are not, and explain in detail why, and how the forest floor ought to be maintained, and what really is native prairie grass, because this grass that we see that we think is native, that's actually is not really something that we've got to be so careful about. But what we do need to be careful about in a post oak woodland is that we have a forest floor in there so that it protects those tree roots. Post oaks do not dry up because of drought. The reason post oaks dry up is because of invasive species trees and privet that get around them and kill them. That's the only reason. A post oak can survive 115-degree weather for a very long period of time and not have any trouble, provided that there's not anything else around it encroaching. The last thing is we need to come up with ideas along the lines of a volunteer mowing program, volunteer projects. And with that, I'll close. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Kelly, appreciate your comments. Over here, yes, sir.
You did look good.
I've been in Arlington for 26 years. That's you. And until very recently, I've been delighted to see that Arlington took an enlightened approach to mosquito control. It appeared to be focused and surgical, unlike our neighbors to the east that had this draconian philosophy. Well, unfortunately, recently here in North Arlington, at least, we're getting gassed at night with neurotoxins. And it really doesn't make too much sense in light of the fact that the spraying didn't start until 30 days after the rain stopped. By then, we had an armada of dragonflies at night. They'd taken care of the problem. I could go out in my yard half naked and never get a bite. I had dragonflies all over the place. The second day after you sprayed the house, besides the fact that I couldn't hardly talk for 2 days, and I'm not going to eat my herbs or my vegetables now, no dragonflies, nothing. So, you started the decline of all the beneficial insects. Next things will go the birds and the lizards. Let's think more intelligently. Oh, and another thing that should be pointed out. If you're going to spray in mucus with the stuff, you've got a little sign that's about this big, and you put it on the road where we live. No one can read it. You have to stop and read it. So if you don't happen to pay attention, you're going to get nuked. You're not going to cover your herbs or your garden or anything else. Many of us are very concerned about that kind of spraying. Please use an intelligent procedure.